Hey, Frog fans. Welcome back to the Talking Frogs podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Plunkett. And on episode 2, we have an incredible guest joining us today. His name is Sam Khan. He's the senior writer and quote-unquote Texpert for The Athletic. He's a college football writer and recruiting writer that covers the whole state of Texas. He's been at this gig for a really long time, and he managed to get out to a TCU spring practice as he makes the rounds around the state this spring. So we had him on the show and just had a wonderful conversation with Sam. He's an incredible mind, and he's been following Sonny Dykes for quite a few years since his time at SMU. So I hope you'll give this show a listen, hear what Sam has to say. I hope you learned something. I definitely did. And thanks again for listening to Talking Frogs. So let's get into this conversation. All right, folks, we are here with Sam Khan of The Athletic. He is the senior writer Texpert for college football and recruiting for the state of Texas. Sam, I really do appreciate you taking the time to chat today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
So I thought we could start by going back in time just a little bit to Halloween of 2021, that Sunday afternoon, when I was out trick-or-treating with my kids, and I'm sure you were probably doing something along those lines as well. And we all kind of got the news at the same time that Gary Patterson was stepping away from TCU football. At that time, he had obviously been the second longest tenured head coach in the country. What was your initial reaction to that news?
Yeah, it's funny you brought that up. It's been so long, or it seems so long since that's happened, that I forgot that it was Halloween that it happened. But yeah, I was about to go with my wife and my oldest son and youngest son. They went out to go trick or treat, and I was about to join them. But I had been on a group text with some of my colleagues, Bruce Feldman and Max Olson, and we had started to hear through the grapevine that something could go down either that night, that Sunday night, or the next day. And so I told my wife, I was like, I'm going to stay here because I need to get on the phone and find out what's going on. And so we were working on tracking it down. Sure enough, it went down. I was definitely surprised at the timing. I will say that based on our reporting, we had been starting to track it in the weeks before that, as TCU's play started to really struggle. And that West Virginia game that they lost at home, that they did not look very good. We had heard some rumblings about how some of the powers that be felt about that. And so we had been on top of tracking and trying to just see, starting to hear that, hey, maybe this is Gary's last year. Did I think it was going to happen before the season was over? No, I didn't. I thought he would get through the rest of the season before we got to that point. And then, of course, after the Kansas State game, we had already prepared just in case, because we had gotten caught a little off guard with Texas Tech making their change when they did a week before, I think 6 days before. So we were a little bit blindsided by that. So we made sure to be a little bit more prepared for GP in case it happened. Of course, it did. And I ended up staying up late that night after being on the phone and working on essentially what was my, take and column and about Gary Patterson's era and why they decided to move on from him at that time. So I would definitely describe it as surprising for the timing, but the decision overall, not shocked at all, just because of the trajectory of the program, where it was at that point. It just seemed like, to me, in my opinion, if last year wasn't the year that they were going to start to make a run and get back in the mix for a Big 12 championship game, I was starting to wonder when it was going to happen.
Yeah, I think it was pretty heartbreaking for TCU fans to see it go down that way. But I agree with you that, when you started to track the program from about 2018 on, that was kind of when things started to go sideways for Patterson a little bit. And the defenses weren't performing quite as well as they were, and the quarterback play was struggling, and none of the pieces seemed to kind of fit like they had early on in his tenure. Obviously, though, now I don't want to dwell too much on that. We've got a lot of respect for Gary Patterson here in Fort Worth, and he's still got his statue outside the stadium, even though he's coaching down in Austin now. There's a good portion of the fan base that's pretty frustrated by that. Personally, though, with the way things ended and kind of that mutual, quote unquote, mutual agreement to move on, I don't blame him for finding another job. But yeah. But now, it's this new era of TCU football. It's the first time TCU fans really kind of 25 and under have ever experienced a head coach that wasn't Gary Patterson. And, I'm 35 and I barely remember the pre-Patterson TCU days, but, Sonny Dykes is at the helm. He seems to have brought in a really good staff, and you had the chance to come out and observe a spring practice. You've obviously, still been talking to folks around the program as well. What is your kind of take on TCU now that it's, about 5-6 months under Dykes?
Well, first off, that was first practice I've ever been to at TCU, believe it or not. And I've been covering college football in Texas for the last 11 years. So, as you know, the access was a little bit different under the old regime. But no, it was good. It was interesting to see. Obviously, I'm pretty familiar with Sonny because of his time at SMU, Garrett Riley, AJ Ricker, a lot of the support staff guys, AC, Jeff Jordan, the director of play personnel, a lot of people that were over at SMU are now over at TCU. So that part was not different at all. It very, very much operated in the same way that they were at SMU in terms of just how they carry themselves, how they run the program. None of that has really changed. What's different to me is just I feel like there's an energy around the place now because I think people are maybe a little bit taken aback with how open door Sonny Dykes is. Obviously Gary had his way of doing things, and that was everything was tight, access was tight, it was very, very much shrouded in secrecy, which some coaches do. That's college coaches are paranoid by nature. Sonny is not one of those, at least when it comes to stuff like this. So it was different to just even be out there and see that, you don't hear somebody screaming at the top of their lungs in the middle of practice, and straining their throat, which is a little bit different. But I will say that, I know Garrett Riley. So, I have a lot of respect for what he did at SMU with Tanner Mordecai this year, and I thought he did a good job with that offense. And then also, Joe Gillespie did a really good job at the Tulsa as a defensive coordinator. And I didn't know a ton about him except just for watching defenses play. Obviously, we all saw Zaven Collins, as a Heisman candidate linebacker a few years ago coming out of Tulsa. Really talented guy, but Joe's got some Texas ties, being from Stephenville High School. Having been a long-time coach there. So this is kind of a homecoming for him. And I am really intrigued. And it's fascinating to me that a program that's done things one way for so long is now doing things differently, not just as a program, but schematically defensively. I mean, they've long been in Gary's 4-2-5, and now they're going to move into this 3-3-5. And it's going to be a process. It's going to take some time. But my impressions are that I like the staff. I think it's got a good group. Some of the guys that he held over, I think were really good decisions. Doug Meacham, Paul Gonzalez, Malcolm Kelly. I thought those were great decisions to hold them over. I love the addition of Brian Carrington in the recruiting area. I think that's going to be huge. Certainly you didn't want to see some of your two young stars go off the staff right away with Rashad Samples and Chidera Uzodiribe, but I think he's found two pretty good young coaches to replace him with. So far, I think it's really interesting. And to me, this year for me is all about learning what this next era is going to look like at TCU. I don't think I have a really good feel for how good they're going to be, but I'm certainly fascinated to see what they look like in the first season under Sonny Dykes.
You mentioned the coaching turnover at the assistant position. That was definitely something that was new to TCU fans. I think you saw Justin Fuente after the Rose Bowl go and take the head coaching job at Memphis, and beyond him, truly the only assistant coach to go anywhere else was Chad Glasgow, when he spent one season as the defensive coordinator over at Texas Tech and then made his way right back to Fort Worth again. So, obviously losing guys is something new. But from my seat, it's kind of nice to have guys that are desired in that way, especially when you consider where they went, with one going to Georgia and one going to the Rams.
No, so here's the thing with that is Rashad Samples was a star. Without question. I think anybody who's, and I'll just speak from my experience following recruiting in this state, talking to high school coaches, talking to other college coaches, one of the biggest, youngest rising stars in this industry. So it is not a shock to me that the Super Bowl champions were interested in him. What I was curious about, and I asked Sonny about this, was that something that Rashad sought out organically? Was this an opportunity that kind of came up? And I think it's a little bit of both. I think Rashad wants to establish himself as more than a recruiter because that's his reputation. And guess what? There's no recruiting in the NFL. So that's your chance to enhance your on-field coaching, improve yourself as an on-field coach. And Chidera, very, very highly thought of. I think Sonny would tell you one of the best young coaches that he's ever been around. And George, I mean, they went to the national champs. I mean, if you're a good program and you hire good people, other people are going to try to hire them away. That's just the bottom line. That's how it works. That's how it works everywhere. At Texas A&M, Mike Elko just took the job at Duke. Nick Saban over at Alabama loses assistants every single year. That's just part of the game if you're hiring good people. And there are people that want to move up. Some people don't. Some people like their positions and want to keep there's something to be said for quality of life in this profession, especially now in 2022 with as many demands as there are in college football and how taxing it can be on you. There is something to be said for, hey, if you're in a comfortable spot and you love it there, there's nothing wrong with being a defensive coordinator for as long as you want to be, or being a receivers coach for as long as you want to be. But a lot of people in this profession, especially the ones who are younger, want to move up and they want to move up the ladder. So definitely it's tough, but I like the hires that he made in place of him. Like Jamarcus McFarland's got a really good reputation as a recruiter. Obviously, if you followed recruiting in this state, you know his name from Lufkin, a very highly publicized recruitment before he went to Oklahoma. And then Anthony Jones has produced some really, really good running backs out of Memphis. And so you like that about him, his track record producing backs. So definitely a little, it's not ideal for you as a coach, but it's something that Sonny, I didn't sense that he had any concerns about those moves or that happening. That's just part of the deal when you hire good people. I mean, he had it happen with SMU. He had Rhett Lashley for a couple seasons, and Rhett Lashley got hired to be the head coach at Miami. That's just part of the deal.
Absolutely, it is. And I had a chance to sit down with TCU's new volleyball coach, Jason Williams, a couple of weeks ago, and he said, I want to hire assistants that want to be head coaches. And so there is something too, I think, about maybe that mentality as a head coach is you want to hire guys and women who are not only capable of being a head coach at some point, but have that drive and that desire, because that's gonna improve your overall staff if they have those aspirations as well, I think.
Yeah, no doubt. Because if you're wanting to move up, you're going to do the absolute best job you can to be the best at where you are at that moment, and that's going to help the team. That's going to help the program. That's going to enhance the program. And so, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm curious to see how the new guys do, but like I said, overall, I think the staff is really good, and I think the support staff is really good. And I think a lot of what they're doing right now is moving in the right direction for this program.
Awesome. Very cool. So you mentioned access a couple of minutes ago, and obviously the access at TCU has changed pretty dramatically since Dykes came on board as the head coach. In this day and age, though, just kind of your experience as the college football writer for the state of Texas and the programs that you've observed in this state, how many of them lean kind of, if we're going to say that Patterson's one end of the spectrum and Dykes is maybe on the other end, where is kind of the state of college football right now as far as access is concerned? And in this day and age, is that access really important for kind of the health of a program?
Yeah, I think so. So I guess two questions there. So the first one is, I'll take the last one first, is it important to the health of the program? I guess it depends on who you are. But in my opinion, it is from a fan base standpoint. Because if I'm a fan, let's not forget these are people that we're talking about. We're talking about young men, young women. We're talking about grown men, grown women that are part of these programs. Yes, we're concerned with the end result on the field, the wins and losses, but I think fans desire to be attached and have an investment in the people in the program. And the only way you can get to know them is through access, through the program showing you who they are. And there's one, I think with Gary was one thing is, okay, yes, the media didn't have access, but also from what I understand, just from talking to people there, is people in the building had problems accessing it. Like, for instance, the video team, to put like, say, hey, we want to post some videos on social media from practice. That was a hard thing to do for people in the TCU, either social media department or multimedia departments, because Gary just didn't want that. And so that was one thing I heard was when Sonny came is that, hey, we're getting so much more content out of practice. And I'm sure the fans have seen recently Doug Meacham mic'd up at practice. Yeah. That's something that wouldn't have happened before.
Absolutely not.
And that's cool. That gives you a taste as a fan. That gives you a little bit of a idea, because if you don't get that, all you know is of Doug Meacham is, his name, what position he coaches, and what his players do. But if you don't see him elsewhere, if you don't see him either doing interviews or these little mic'd up segments, that stuff gives you a little taste of of who he is, just a little bit. You don't know who he is, but it gives you a little sampling of it. And then as he talks to us, the reporters and stuff like that, then you'll get to know these guys. And the same thing with the players. The players, I'm sure for you guys, there's players that you probably are going to talk to this year that you haven't talked to before, and you get to learn some of their stories. And some of them have really fascinating backstories. And I think when you learn something, like I'll give you an example, not from this program, but a guy that I covered when he was at Houston, De'Aaron King, who was the quarterback of Miami,
a TCU recruit who wanted to play quarterback here.
That's right.
No.
That's right. That's right. And so De'Aaron is a guy that I think a lot of people got invested in because of his story, because he and I sat one day at a coffee shop for a couple hours and he told me everything about, his father died when right after he left Houston, or right before he left Houston, his mother getting diagnosed with cancer. She's in remission since, which is fortunate, but and then everything that happened when he transferred from Houston. But that's all a personal story that was super interesting. And I think you'll find a lot of people that don't even know De'Aaron, or people who maybe used to root for him in Houston still root for that guy because they know about him and his personal story. And you root for a kid like that. So that's one part of it. The other part is where does TCU fall, or where does the state of access fall in college football? It depends on where you are. So in the SEC, I would say the access is not very good. In the Big 12, it's a little bit better. In the state of Texas, I would say A&M and Texas are fairly restrictive. You really only get their head coaches. Texas gives you a lot of players, which is helpful. A&M lately has not. A&M's not giving very many players, which is kind of annoying. But then the rest of the programs the other FBS programs in the state, I found to be pretty good. Texas Tech is really accessible. Houston, TCU now under Sonny Dykes is very accessible. SMU, I just spent some time over there. North Texas, you name it. All the rest of those programs, I really don't have any problems. You have no problems getting assistant coaches. You have no problem getting players, and that's a plus. So I think the more higher profile the program is, the less you typically find the access to be. Georgia and Alabama and A&M and Ohio State and those kinds of programs are going to be a little bit more restrictive. With some exceptions, Clemson gives a pretty good amount of access, and then the Group of Five programs or the middle tier Power Five programs, a lot of them are pretty good, but a lot of it falls on the coach. It's a coach's decision usually. These days, the SIDs don't really make I guess they can try to push for certain things, but ultimately it's up to the coach on what he wants to allow. And so I will say that it helps me obviously in my job, but I think it does help build a connection with fans and readers and the audience, the people that watch and invest in these programs. And it's nice to have that access if you can. And I think it's a great step for TCU. And I think, like I said, I think the fans are going to buy in a little bit more because of the access they'll have to this program through social media, through media and other stuff.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's anything out of kind of the scope of what Dykes was doing at SMU. But I, from my perspective, it has bought him a lot of goodwill with the fan base early on, which I think is really important. And when we talk about this access too, I think kind of one of the newer aspects that's really important for people to consider as well is all of these student athletes are trying to build their brand now with NIL stuff, and the access that you get towards those players, whether it's restricted or not, has a huge impact on that for these kids. And so now, I think in this day and age, when we start to talk about program access, that's going to be a huge thing that's at play as well, simply because a lot of these kids are going to get paid for, being public faces.
Absolutely. No, there's no question about that. I'm glad you mentioned that because I'd forgotten about that part of it, because that is an important part. These guys are going to start building their brands as recruits. They already are. They are on social media. They're posting about their recruitment. I mean, heck, Quinn Ewers was able to reclassify and cash in mostly because of his talent, but that he still is building a brand. And obviously, he connected it to, I guess, a kombucha company upon graduating early from South Lake Carroll. But that's an important part. And so, so the more exposure you have, the more time you get in front of a camera, in front of a microphone. Again, that's how people get to know you. And if they get to know you, they're more likely to be interested in something you may pitch. The interesting part about that is going to create an interesting dynamic when it comes to reporters and media access in general, because a lot of these athletes have agents now. And so if they have an NIL deal, they may make a public appearance and it's going to be totally outside of the football program. Like, for instance, at Texas, Casey Thompson and Bijan Robinson both had NIL deals for certain products, and they did events which were like promotional events for the product they were endorsing. And it was free for media to come out and do interviews. And that was a great setup. I actually did an interview with Bijan Robinson because he'd signed a deal with the Zone, the boxing broadcast company, the streaming service. And so, that was something that had nothing to do with Texas. Texas didn't set any of that up. It was the people from the Zone or whoever his Bijan agents was reached out to me and was like, hey, he's doing this boxing thing because he's super interested in it. Would you like to interview with him? I'm like, absolutely. I was like, that's access to, one of the best running backs in the country. I absolutely would do that. And so, and it was a good Q&A, and we talked a little bit about his boxing issue. We talked a lot about football and what he thought about how the first season went. But yeah, you're right on target with that, is that the NIL part is an important part of this equation. I think you're going to see athletes who are smart and their agents and representation are going to be smart to push for more exposure for them, because that'll help them monetize their NIL.
Yeah, and you mentioned Brian Carrington earlier. I think he's definitely the mind behind all of that now at TCU. I was at a junior day recently, and one of the things that I was asking kids about as they kind of came out of their day of presentations and touring the facilities and everything was about the NIL aspect of things, and they all said to a T that his presentation was the best presentation they've ever seen. A lot of them made the joke of, I hate lectures when I'm in school, but I was locked in on this PowerPoint, right? And so, yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think that that's just a really interesting thing to throw into the dynamic of player access at this level, because they are still, technically kind of holding amateur status, I guess, for at least a little while longer. But kind of want to pivot a little bit and just talk about this upcoming season and football with Sonny Dykes. You've seen Dykes, obviously you've observed him pretty closely at SMU for the past 3-4 years. But the Dykes-Riley offense moving into the Big 12, being applied to a Big 12 program, what are your thoughts on how successful that can be? And based on the talent that TCU has currently, what's setting up for TCU in 2022?
Yeah, I think ultimately it depends on personnel. I mean, the scheme obviously matters, but who you have matters more. And they do have a good baseline to start with. I think with as much experience you have returning on the offensive line, that helps. The talent at receiver, I think, helps. You got Quentin Johnson, Tay Barber, D Davis, all those guys. I think that's a super helpful thing to have. You got a couple experienced quarterbacks. I'm curious to see, is the quarterback going to be one of those two, or is it going to be a younger guy, or is it going to be somebody out of the portal? That I think is probably the biggest question. You got some talent running back, Kendre Miller. Obviously, you lost Zach, which is tough, but they brought in a couple of transfers. I think they'd like to improve the depth there at running back if they can. But ultimately, offensively, I think they're built to succeed pretty quickly, just because, like I said, you have that synergy. Sonny's an offensive head coach. Garrett's been with him for a couple of years now, so there's a synergy there. The ultimate thing is going to be the offensive players just learning terminology. That's pretty much it, and there's plenty of time to do that and get used to it. But once it's probably going to take a couple of games to get some of the kinks worked out. But I think overall they'll be fine as long as the talent level is good. And I'll be curious to see how active they are in the portal after spring ball. Once we hit that rash of, and we'll see a bunch of players hit the portal after everybody's spring practice wraps up, because that's just how it's going to work. And there's, I think, a deadline to where you have to declare in May before to be eligible immediately for this year. But I'll be curious to see how active they are in that area to shore up the talent right away. But overall, I think they feel good about the talent they have on hand. And I guess it's just a matter of improving depth in some spots. But I think the outlook is good. And I think Riley will do a fine job running that offense, calling that offense. And whoever it is, if it's Max Duggan, if it's Chandler Morris, if it's somebody else, I think they'll be fine. I think they'll I don't think they'll come out and score 50 points a game, but I think there'll be some positive you'll see some positive stuff. They don't have a Zach Evans on this team. So there's no way of finding that. But I mean, the fans saw Kendre Miller play last year, and I think he's plenty capable. I think he's a good guy. And Quentin Johnston, I mean, that guy, I just cannot get over how he looked in that Oklahoma game last year. And I saw him a lot last year, but that was the one that just sticks out of my brain. Some of the catches he made that night. That guy's going to play on Sundays. And so they'll find ways to get him the ball. And when you have some really talented skill guys, I think that's a really, really good place to start.
You mentioned Quentin Johnson. I think there was a large amount of frustration from the TCU fans last year about his usage throughout the season, because it seemed, just from an outside observer, to be relatively low compared to other, big, fast number one receivers that are out there. You look at who was it? I believe Worthy down at Texas as a freshman was absolutely dominating. And I think TCU fans wanted to see Quentin get the ball in a similar fashion. He's moved from the Z spot to the X spot now, which according to some of the coaches is kind of the more ideal spot for him. But when you think about, him specifically, what about his game makes him so scary for opposing defenses. And if you're the offensive coordinator at TCU, what are you doing to get the ball in his hands?
I'm just, a lot of isolation. Obviously, I think you got to be creative a little bit because you're going to have teams that are going to try and take him away and put a safety over the top of him. So you're going to have to rely on some of those other veterans to really make teams pay over the middle and on the other side. But you get creative. Also having a good run game is really, really, really key to that, because if you're going to force them to pay attention to the run, if you're going to force them to commit a safety in the box, that's going to open up some one-on-one chances. But what makes him scary is just pure athletic ability, and the guy can just go up and get the ball. And when you can that makes him a huge red zone target, but also he's great down the field threat as well. So that's the thing. And the thing is, I get the sense just from talking to him, talking to Malcolm Kelly, the receivers coach, he seems to me like a guy, everybody that I've talked to over there has said that guy does everything he's supposed to do on the field, off the field. The way he practices the way you're supposed to practice. He works out in the weight room the way you're supposed to work out. So all those things. And so that's going to make it even easier to get other guys to buy in on offense. And that's only going to be good for TCU, because your best player, your guy that's going to play on Sundays, is giving it all he's got every practice, every day, and taking care of his business off the field. So that approach, combined with just the pure athleticism that he has, like I said, it's not rocket science. You just got to figure out a way to get him the ball. That's really all it is. If you've got to just throw him out on a quick bubble screen and throw it, make him let him do something with the ball after that, do that. Just find a way to give him the ball. And I think you talked about not getting ball enough. I think there was some frustration of that with Zach Evans too. Personally, as an observer, it drove me bananas how rare I thought he got the ball. Not necessarily how rare, but how he would get 12 carries and that's about it. And I know Gary said that maybe he asked out or whatever, that he got tired or whatever. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I find that a little bit difficult to believe, but I don't know what was going on there because I was not in the meeting rooms. I just know, and I've talked to other coaches around the state, and I know if it were me, I'd be giving that guy the ball 20 times a game. Certainly, you talked about Xavier Worthy at Texas. They did that. They threw him the ball a lot. They gave Bijan Robinson the ball 20 times a game because that's what you do with your best players. And so I don't have any doubt that TCU will utilize Quentin Johnson the way they need to.
You got me thinking about Zach Evans now, but I
felt like I was writing that every week. Like,
yeah,
gosh, like there was time he just was not touching the ball enough. Like I was at the Iron Skillet game and he came out mid third quarter. He had like 150 or 170 yards on like 13 or 14 touches, and he didn't touch the ball like once, twice the rest of the night.
Yeah.
And I was like, why would you get away from it? And and don't get me wrong, Kendra was playing really well that night too. But I just would not stop giving that guy the ball until he was absolutely just exhausted, because that kid, that's another kid who's going to play on Sundays. But, that's not something that they have to worry about because he won't be there. But they've got, like I said, I don't have any doubt based on the way I saw them use Rashee Rice, the way I saw them use Reggie Roberson, the way I saw them use Danny Gray, the way I saw them use Grant Calcaterra. I have pretty good confidence that Garrett Riley's not going to overthink this offensively.
That's good to hear. I think for a lot of Frog fans is just go out and give the ball to your best players. That is typically a pretty good recipe for success. When we think about TCU football, just kind of as a program, as an institution, when you think about all of the programs in the state, where does TCU stack up compared to maybe Texas A&M, Tech, Baylor, the other programs in the state?
I mean, right now, as to where they are in terms of just how good they are, they're probably in the middle of the pack right now. But in terms of like what they have in their potential, I think it's an upper tier program. Obviously, they don't have the resources that Texas and Texas A&M has. Very few do. I mean, those are two of the most revenue producing athletic programs in the country. But when you get past that, to me, they're on the level with Baylor, probably notch above Texas Tech. But I think when I look at the new Big 12, when Oklahoma and Texas move on and you bring in Houston, BYU, UCF, and Cincinnati, I think TCU, if they get this era started right with Dykes and they recruit the way they're supposed to, they utilize the portal the way they're supposed to, and they utilize their resources the way they can, because TCU's got a lot of resources. You walk around that stadium, you walk around that east side renovation they did. They're not lacking for much. There are some things that need to be done. I know they ripped up the turf in the indoor facility because Sonny said it was old and it was not good, and he was actually a little bit concerned about players' health for that. So they're getting that done. But that snap of finger, you got that done really quickly. Mm-hmm. And then I know they want to do some stuff. Just from what I've heard, they want to do some stuff with the weight room at some point. But with the resources they have, and when I look at the future new Big 12, I think they should be in the mix, in the conversation, to be, if not the best program, one of the best programs in the new Big 12. I think right now Baylor's probably a little bit ahead of them just because of their on-field success, because Baylor has been to 2 Big 12 title games in the last 3 years and won one of them. So they're a little bit ahead of TCU right now. But when I look at Fort Worth as a location, when I look at the recruiting base around TCU, you're not far. You're right in the middle of DFW. You're not far from Central Texas. You're not super far from Houston, which is another hotbed. You're not far from East Texas. And oh, by the way, if you want to go down the I-20 corridor to North Louisiana and get some players, you certainly can. It's not too far. I look at that. I look at the resource. I look at the commitment that I have. It seems like one of the things in the Gary Patterson area, you got to give him a lot of credit for, is he had everybody pulling in the same direction, committed to success of the program, to get from where they were post Southwest Conference breakup and find their way back into a power conference is one of the most amazing success stories in college football to me. And it's a testament to their on-field success, because if they did not win a Rose Bowl, if they did not have the double-digit wins in the Gary Patterson they did so consistently, that would have never happened. Mm-hmm. So that's a testament to what he accomplished there. But so when I consider all that and the commitment that you have from donors, from resources, from administration, that everybody seems to be in line and moving in the same direction. And then I could take that recruiting base into consideration. And the fact you're talking about age of recruits and stuff is, if I'm a recruit, if I'm an 18-year-old recruit now or 17-year-old recruit, I remember when TCU was this close to the playoff. Mm-hmm. I remember when they were number 3 the second to last week of the season. And so, sorry to bring that up. It's a sore spot, but it's okay. But people, they have been relevant. It's a little bit far removed from the Rose Bowl now. We're talking about almost a dozen years now from the Rose Bowl, but it's still not super far. We're not super far enough. We're not super far removed from them being really good or playing for a Big 12 championship. It's been longer than they would like it to be, but it's not been super long. So to me, you take all that in consideration, I think them and Baylor and Oklahoma State, to me, are the 3 teams that I would look at to be the ones fighting for the top of the conference right out of the chute when Oklahoma and Texas move on. And then I'm interested to see, what does Texas Tech look like under Joey McGuire? Like, that is, to me, is a big wild card in all this, because they seem to finally have the financial support from boosters, and they have a head coach who's really recruiting at a high level right now. Houston is going to be super fascinating to me, because they've always had the institutional want to. They've just never had the conference affiliation. Now they have that, and they have a coach who's coached in the Big 12 before. So I'm curious to see. I think the ceiling on Houston is really high, and I think they could be somebody that jumps in that mix with those top 3 that I just mentioned. But TCU, to me, there's no reason why they shouldn't be a regular conference title contender in the future Big 12. To me, they have everything they need to do it.
I think that's really good news. I tend to agree with you as well. Just simply from a location standpoint too, Fort Worth is better than Waco or Stillwater or Lubbock or any of those other places.
A lot more places to eat and drink. That's for sure.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. Well, Sam, thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate all that you do for the Athletic, all that you do for the Big 12 and for the state of Texas as far as covering college football and recruiting. And it's been a joy to have this conversation with you today, man.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
And that'll do it for this episode of the Talking Frogs podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Jamie Plunkett. You can follow me on Twitter at Frog Preacher. You can also follow Frogs Today at Frogs Today on Twitter and Instagram, like the Facebook page, and make sure you're checking out frogstoday.com for all of the latest news surrounding TCU athletics from Jeff, Melissa, and myself. And don't forget to check out the YouTube channel too, where Brian Estridge has a weekly Frogs Today TV show. You're not going to want to miss the guests that come on his show. I'm telling you right now. Thanks again for all your support. We'll be back with episode 3 of Talking Frogs soon enough. But for now, I'll talk to you next time. Go Frogs.